The assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy is perhaps the deepest psychological scar that the American public has had to bear in the 20th century. A wound so deep, in fact, that even today it seems he still cannot rest in peace. Lee Harvey Oswald was, of course, the first man accused. In the public's mind at the time, he was the lone killer, whose life was taken by another lone killer, Jack Ruby, before he could testify in court. But conspiracy theorists still ask if Oswald had any choice in his actions. Had he been programmed to kill?
Lee Harvey Oswald, if not the first Manchurian candidate, was one of the first Manchurian candidates used by the CIA.
The theory begins with JFK's arrival in Washington. One of his first actions was to sack Allen Dulles from the CIA. During Dulles' tenure, it is alleged that he set up MK-Ultra, an experiment to create programmed killers. Author John Marks was the first to reveal this in his book, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate.
In the late 1940s, there was a tremendous concern inside the CIA and the U.S. government about the possibilities of mind control, of brainwashing, if you will. There had been a Hungarian cardinal who had stood up at a show trial in Budapest and seemed to be talking robot-like in a kind of a controlled sort of way. And there was a sense, there was a feeling, there was a fear that there was a technology available which allowed people to brainwash people to commit acts against their will.
Now, the entire purpose of MK-Ultra was the creation of what they called a Manchurian candidate, which was a person who could be used to commit an assassination and then made to forget about it afterwards.
Some former CIA operatives from this period, such as Helmut Scherer, believed that it wasn't the CIA itself, but a covert faction within it that was controlling Oswald.
He was under the control of some branch or faction of the CIA that the CIA itself didn't know about.
After JFK's killing, Allen Dulles reappeared, this time on a select committee put together to investigate the assassination. Was he there, as many conspiracy theorists believe, to make sure that the investigation didn't reveal anything untoward? Four years after his brother's death, Bobby Kennedy was now running for the Democratic nomination for president. The former Attorney General was well aware that his reputation for confronting organizations as varied as the Mafia and the FBI could put him in danger. No one thought his killing would be broadcast on national television. Once again, a lone gunman was apparently the culprit. Sirhan Sirhan shot Bobby Kennedy dead from 3 feet.
It took 6 men to pry that gun out of Sirhan's hand because he was in a hypnotic trance. So then when it was all over, he couldn't remember. He still can't remember what happened. That's a Manchurian candidate.
One FBI agent who was there that day believes that the Manchurian candidate theory may not be so wide of the mark.
Sirhan could have been hypnotized. He could have been a Manchurian candidate programmed to assassinate Bobby Kennedy, and I do think that there is a fair amount of validity to that theory.
There appears to be no doubt that Sirhan Sirhan shot at Bobby Kennedy, but there are some strange anomalies that suggest he was not the only assassin present that day.
The police there found more bullets in the walls than were in his gun, so how do you account for the killing of Robert Kennedy? Well, there were powder burns on his neck, right? Because somebody standing behind him had pulled the trigger.
The implications are that there was another gun in the pantry at the time of the shooting and that it was fired.
A computer reconstruction of the assassination seems to show that Sirhan Sirhan could not have killed Kennedy. The coroner, Dr. Thomas Noguchi, concluded that Kennedy was almost certainly killed from bullets shot from behind. Sirhan Sirhan was, of course, in front of him. The only person standing in the right place to inflict the wounds was a security guard, according to eyewitness Scott Enyard.
The security guard got up off the floor after Kennedy fell on him, ripping his tie off on the way down. When I saw him stand up, which is when I put my camera down, his gun was out. The point is we have complete disagreement between the coroner, Dr. Thomas Noguchi, and the LAPD. Dr. Noguchi was not even allowed to testify at the trial. Dr. Noguchi did a filmed recreation to try to show how Sirhan could have shot him and couldn't do it. No matter how he moved the people around, no matter how he twisted things around, he could not make that work.
Enyard took photos of the scene prior to the assassination, which he believes shows the true assassin. After the shooting, the LAPD impounded his photos before he could make copies. It was 25 years before the photos were returned, and only after he had sued the city of Los Angeles. Strangely, the courier returning the photos was robbed, and photos stolen. The evidence gone forever.
Bobby Kennedy had mentioned to people that were he to be nominated and run for president, the first thing that he would do was reopen the investigation into the death of his brother. And these are the kinds of things that, for political reasons, just could not happen. And so however he ended up dead, whether it was by Sirhan or whether it was going to be 2 weeks later by somebody else, there were definitely forces at work in this country and from around the world that wanted that man dead.
In 1977, the Carter administration held an inquiry into the existence or otherwise of the MK-Ultra program. The inquiry revealed nothing. This man, however, claims that MK-Ultra was a fact.
The Manchurian candidate certainly had a great deal to do with the research that we were possible, that somebody had to be looking to see whether it was possible or not.
Couldn't make laboratory guesses about whether a person would be able to become a controlled assassin. If you really wanted to find out if you could create a controlled assassin, you had to try to create a controlled assassin who would kill people. That was the only way to do it.
The assassin can be male or female, but the project was best begun when the subject was very young.
It started when I was a very young child. My father was an assassin. He also was involved in programming children through torture, through mind control, hypnosis, and other means. He was wanting to use me as a guinea pig to show his associates, particularly at the CIA, what he could do with one child. So I started being trained how to kill when I was 4 years old. It was back probably starting in the very early 70s, if not earlier. It ended somewhere around 1990. There was over 76 deaths. Sometimes I would just knock on the door and say, my car broke down, or I'm lost, can you help me, find a certain home? And I would go in, and it was very simple after that. I would use a zip wire, sometimes I would use a gun. One time they had me go in as a prostitute, and while the man was in bed, all I had to do was take a scarf that they had already given me to wear and dip it in a toilet. Somehow the water activated the chemical on the scarf, and then I just laid it on the man's face and he died.
Here comes a candle to light you to bed, and here comes a chopper to chop off your head. The last man's head.
I had what were called Naomi programs that were taught how to dip a pin in like Vaseline that had a chemical on top of the Vaseline in the container, and then just scratch somebody with it. Guns were so familiar to me, although I was never allowed to have a gun at home. I now have one, and I know how to use it, and I found out the first time I tried to use it, I'm a very good shot without any supposed training.
One of the more unlikely targets of a brainwashed assassin was allegedly John Lennon. Apparently a danger to the state because of his political views, he was shot outside his apartment building by Mark Chapman. The doorman of the building says that after the shooting, Chapman sat down and resumed reading his novel Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger.
I believe the contents of The Catcher in the Rye contain trigger words and may actually have been used for some purpose in his programming. Now, the book itself was written by a former OSS officer. Catcher in the Rye has turned up in several assassinations since. So it's therefore logical to believe that it had some role in the assassin programming.
Several weeks ago, I went to a public library and I saw Catcher in the Rye on the shelf, and immediately I went into a trance. And I kept staring at it, and I finally was able to get enough control of myself to pull that book out and open it. And when I saw what it was about, I realized how perfect that book would be for somebody to use on someone who had a problem as far as perhaps an attachment disorder where they are not able to bond with people and emotionally connect with people. And to me, that would be the perfect type person to use as a patsy for an assassination.
Conspiracy theorists also cite mind control devices such as brain implants, which they believe enable people to be controlled from a distance.
The Office of Naval Research in the 50s and 60s funded research where brain electrode implants were put into human beings. This was also funded by the Army and the CIA.
There is evidence to suggest that implants have been used to control the human mind. This footage from the 1960s shows an experiment where an implant was placed in a bowl, allowing scientists to control its reactions as simply as changing channels on a television. Is it possible that Oswald was one of the first human guinea pigs for this new technology?
So it's a scientific fact that you can put a brain electrode in somebody's head, you can stimulate that electrically from a remote distance, and that will have a dramatic effect on their behavior. One of the MK Ultra sites was at Tsugi Air Force Base in Japan, and then Lee Harvey Oswald was stationed there at one time.
He was in the hospital for a while to have his tonsils taken out, and it was during that time that a very crude implant was inserted into his head. The implant malfunctioned, right, so he couldn't operate as an assassin himself, but he could still be used as a patsy.
One man in Sweden believes that he too was implanted with a device and that he has the evidence to prove it. Maisland claims that these implants had a radical effect on his personality, making him withdrawn and antisocial.
The first time I got involved in this technology or were implanted were at a hospital during an operation here in Stockholm where the surgeon implanted a transmitter in my right nostril during the operation. I were implanted with radio transmitters, big like of the size of a small bullet, and as we can see of the X-rays.
Every general practitioner can see that there's something wrong with those X-rays. The implants are shown very, very clearly. And of course, how they were put there, you can't say from an X-ray, but you can see that it was an implant, something that does not belong to the X-ray. It's very easy. If you implant into the brain, it can be done through the nostrils. It's like a sinus puncture, actually, almost. Or, of course, you can have a drill into the skull straight ahead. But nowadays, the implants have become very sophisticated, very small, and they are often put into the backs of the people because they do not show in autopsies.
Unable to function successfully in society, he found himself drifting into a life of petty crime. Becoming desperate, he sent his X-rays to a doctor in New York, who confirmed that they had indicated FON there. Naseland had them removed in Sweden and asked that he be able to keep these so-called implants.
But when I returned about 10 days later on, when they had told me to come back, they had lost the transmitter. They had lost this piece which were removed from my head in Athens. I think that any security against either CIA or the Swedish SEPO must have been involved in this.
Mainstream scientists and especially medical doctors know nothing about this technology. It's been well kept secret within the military because in NATO countries, I live in Norway now, military intelligence, that is for instance electronic surveillance project of the Navy, is doing implants on people in Norway.
It is now alleged that the most recent development in this mind control technology does away with implants and is microwave-based, sending messages directly into the mind of the recipient.
Back in 1992, over the holidays, I was sound asleep one night in my apartment, and I was suddenly awakened out of a very deep sleep. I found that unusual because though I was very relaxed, I was extremely alert mentally. When all of a sudden, I very distinctly and quite clearly heard a voice say matter-of-factly in my right ear, "The underground bases are real."
It seems that many of these formerly covert technologies find their way into the public domain, eventually.
Recently I've discovered that a patent was granted in 1989 to do just that, to broadcast an intelligible voice right into the auditory cortex. The technology by which this voice can be broadcast into the human mind is very straightforward. A person speaks into a microphone. What they say is then transmitted via a plurality of microwaves into the target individual, where that person then hears the voice as if it was speaking in their ear, in their inner ear, as it were, very clearly. And this is what happened to me. I'm thoroughly persuaded of that. There's no doubt in my mind.
Many others have reported voices in their heads. One such who felt that outsiders were tampering with his mind was an inmate of an American jail.
For several years now, I've been subjected to the influence of some type of device or technology that causes me to receive voice transmissions in my head, just as if I had little radio speakers in my inner ears.
Other inmates substantiated his claims, but the case was thrown out due to lack of evidence. After all, who would ever believe a convicted felon? Much of this technology was developed during the Cold War. Surely now that the age is behind us, this technology has no use anymore. Conspiracy theorists believe that the Cold Warriors are still at work and point to the biggest terrorist action ever seen in North America, the Oklahoma City bombing. The bomber, many believed responsible, was former soldier Timothy McVeigh. That he was involved is beyond dispute. But was he another Oswald, programmed to kill?
The official story is that when he was in the Army, he became frustrated and depressed because he couldn't make the Special Forces. He goes to work at CalSpan, and after a year, he suddenly becomes enraged at the United States government because he believed that he had an implant in his body. Well, what was CalSpan? The company that he was working for was a top-secret microelectronics firm, as a matter of fact, that began at Cornell.
Whilst at CalSpan, McVeigh, originally a model employee, became, according to friends, increasingly paranoid, believing that he was being controlled by the US government. A grand jury was set up to investigate claims of conspiracy.
The reason for calling a grand jury, this local grand jury that's been in session now for many months, was to determine if there was a wider conspiracy than just McVeigh and Nichols. And so for months now we've been taking testimony from anyone who claimed to have knowledge that there was any broader conspiracy or that there were any other individuals involved. But secondly, to see, they claimed that there was information that federal employees had been notified ahead of time that there was going to be a bombing that day and they shouldn't go to work.
So many people have come forward to claim that they have been victims of government or covert forces within government-sponsored mind control experiments that the White House was forced to act. ACHES, or ACHES, is a support group championing the rights of these victims, and these videos are just some of the personal accounts they have collected.
Mind control experimentation. I was subjected to mind control experimentation during the Cold War era in the 1950s.
And I'm a citizen of the United States. I've been a victim of mind control experimentation since 1950.
I'm also an American citizen living in Canada who was a victim of the MK-Ultra program in the 1960s.
I was a victim of mind control from New Orleans, Louisiana. I demand that the President of the United States appoint an advisory committee to look into...
I, at 14 and 6 years of age, underwent 2 unwitting mind control experimental procedures involving brain tissue removal. I'd like to convey my concerns to the President of the United States and the bill.
As a child, I was subjected to mind control experimentation that is continuing today. As a citizen of the United States, I demand that a presidential inquiry and a commission...
There be a presidential inquiry into the CIA's mind control projects. I was born in 1975, and I was an unwilling participant in these heinous crimes. This stuff has to stop. It's against all laws, codes, and moral ethics known to man. Please do something.
I think it is the biggest threat to humanity, and it's been going on for maybe 50 years.
Under public pressure, the Clinton administration has forced the CIA to release information.
I believe that if something were to happen to me, and I of course hope it won't, that it would be somebody sent in from a Manchurian candidate type background, because these people are too cowardly to do it themselves.
The CIA were given a get-out clause, however. They can destroy any files which they deem a breach of national security. So it seems we may never know the truth about these experiments, or the lengths to which certain groups, unaccountable to the American public, were willing to go to try to control the minds of their own population.